A split second of silence, then the flash of a pickup truck, its headlights cutting through Montana dusk, Greg Green leaning over something in the back, something that shouldn't be there. The last time anyone saw Laura Johnson alive was September 13, 2018, but what followed turned a family's worst fears into a courtroom nightmare with no body, only questions. If you knew something was wrong, what would you do? Would you demand answers, tear your world apart looking for proof? Because Laura's sons did just that. They pushed, they searched, and they uncovered surveillance footage that shattered every excuse. The person she trusted most, her boyfriend, Greg Green, said she packed 2 red suitcases and drove off. But the video tells another story. Laura walked into the house and never walked out. Her family believed she was in danger. They believed Greg Green was lying. He was eventually convicted for her murder, sentenced to 100 years in prison. But Laura's body was never found. Here's what we know. Here's what still haunts them. Stay with me. If you care about justice, if you believe Laura deserves a voice, hit like, leave a comment, share this story. Don't let it fade into silence. Because her silence should never be forgotten. She was more than a headline. Laura Johnson was a mother of 5, a woman who had already lived through hardship, divorce, and the constant struggle of providing for her children. She had raised them in Washington, later moved to Las Vegas for work, and finally tried to start over in Montana. Friends remembered her as caring and devoted, someone who put her kids first, someone who wanted a stable future after years of uncertainty. But that fresh start came with a gamble. Laura met Gregory Green through online dating. On the surface, he was charming, offering companionship and the promise of a new chapter. Laura moved into his house near Libby, Montana. To outsiders, it seemed like she was building stability again. To her children, though, something felt off. The final days before she vanished, Laura stayed in touch with her kids as she always did. Then, silence. September 13, 2018 was the last time anyone heard her voice. Texts went unanswered. Calls rang without reply. Days turned into a week, and the children who were used to hearing from their mother every day felt the weight of dread pressing down. Gregory Green told them a story. He said Laura packed 2 red suitcases and left, claiming she was going to Washington. He said she had simply walked out. But the people who knew Laura best refused to accept that. She would never abandon her children without a word. Their suspicion only grew when they learned of a camera pointed at Green's driveway. And what it captured was chilling. On the night Laura vanished, she can be seen walking into Greg's home. Hours later, the same camera shows Greg moving items, heavy, deliberate, loaded into his truck bed. But Laura never appears leaving that house. Not once. Her children begged police to investigate. Neighbors whispered about her sudden absence. The home she shared with Greg remained, her belongings untouched, but Laura herself was gone. No body, no trace, only a story told by the one man who lived with her. And that is the mystery. How does a mother of 5, living under the same roof with her partner, disappear without leaving the front door? If your mother, your sister, your daughter went missing in this way, would you believe she just walked away? Or would you demand answers? Don't let this story vanish like Laura did. Like, comment, share, and subscribe if you think her voice deserves to be heard, because silence only protects the guilty. A split second of silence, then the flash of a pickup truck, its headlights cutting through Montana dusk, Greg Green leaning over something in the back, something that shouldn't be there. The last time anyone saw Laura Johnson alive was September 13, 2018. But what followed turned a family's worst fears into a courtroom nightmare with no body, only questions. If you knew something was wrong, what would you do? Would you demand answers, tear your world apart looking for proof? Because Laura's sons did just that. They pushed, they searched, and they uncovered surveillance footage that shattered every excuse. The person she trusted most, her boyfriend, Greg Green, said she packed 2 red suitcases and drove off. But the video tells another story. Laura walked into the house and never walked out. Her family believed she was in danger. They believed Greg Green was lying. He was eventually convicted for her murder, sentenced to 100 years in prison. But Laura's body was never found. Here's what we know. Here's what still haunts them. Stay with me. If you care about justice, if you believe Laura deserves a voice, hit like, leave a comment, share this story. Don't let it fade into silence, because her silence should never be forgotten. The silence grew unbearable. Laura's children refused to accept the idea that their mother had simply walked away. They knew her habits. They knew her love. And so, when days turned into weeks without a call, a text, or even a trace of her on social media, panic hardened into action. They filed a missing persons report. They sat with investigators and described in detail their mother's routines. They told police she would never abandon them. Their fear was not just that she was gone. It was that someone was stopping her from coming back. Detectives listened. They canvassed the area, knocking on doors, questioning neighbors, and asking who had last seen Laura. Flyers went up across Libby. Volunteers combed through brush and backroads, looking for any sign. But no cell phone pings. No financial transactions. Not even the smallest clue that she had packed up and left of her own free will. And then, the suspicion turned sharply toward the man inside her home. Greg Green, the boyfriend, the one who shared her bed. Greg had met Laura through an online dating site. To him, she was a chance at companionship. To her, he was stability in a small Montana town. But living together wasn't smooth. Friends of Laura recalled tension. Her children noticed his controlling behavior. And when she disappeared, it was Greg who stepped forward with a story that raised more questions than it answered. He told detectives Laura had argued with him, packed 2 red suitcases, and walked out. He insisted she left for Washington, starting a new life without him. He stuck to that story again and again. But Greg's behavior spoke louder than his words. When investigators pressed him, he appeared calm, too calm. He didn't show the urgency, the panic, the desperation that families expect from someone whose partner has just vanished. He didn't organize searches. He didn't plead for her return. Instead, he distanced himself. The cracks widened when police reviewed the surveillance footage from a neighbor's security camera. The recording showed Laura entering the house on September 13th. After that, her image vanished. Hours later, Greg could be seen loading heavy objects into his pickup, moving with an eerie calm. And the supposed red suitcases? Not one neighbor recalled ever seeing Laura with them. Investigators began to question what motive Greg might have had. Was it money? Was it jealousy? Was it control? He had been known to struggle financially. And Laura, who was considering moving closer to her children, may have been planning to leave him. To a man like Greg, that meant losing the home he shared, the woman he depended on, and perhaps even the image he crafted of himself. Still, detectives had to ask, was Greg the only one? Could someone else have played a role? Friends were questioned. Neighbors were interviewed. Rumors surfaced. Some whispered that Greg had confided in others, that he may have had help covering his tracks, that someone close to him knew more than they dared to admit. One neighbor even claimed Greg's story shifted depending on who he spoke to. To one person, Laura left on foot. To another, she had driven off. The contradictions piled up. Yet despite the whispers and suspicions, no one came forward with a confession. No second suspect was ever formally charged. Greg stood alone in the spotlight, but shadows lingered around the question. Did he act alone? Or did someone else help erase Laura's presence? By now, investigators were collecting evidence piece by piece. They studied Greg's timeline, his movements, his truck. They listened closely as his story frayed under pressure. What they found was not a body, but a pattern of lies. How does a man explain away footage showing the woman he loved entering his home, never to be seen again? How does he explain hours of silence while he hauls heavy loads into the back of his truck in the dead of night? Gregory Green thought his story would stand. But evidence has a way of speaking when the missing cannot. And as each contradiction surfaced, the walls around his story began to collapse. If your partner disappeared in the night, would you be the first one knocking on every door for answers? Or would you sit back and invent excuses? Don't let apathy protect the guilty. Like this story, share it, subscribe to it, because every voice raised for Laura Johnson is a voice raised against silence. What if the truth was always inside that house? What if the only person who could explain Laura Johnson's disappearance was the very man who insisted she simply walked away? Theory 1. Gregory Green is guilty. That he ended Laura's life in order to keep control over the house, over finances, over her. Prosecutors later argued that Laura may have been preparing to leave him to return closer to her children. And for Greg, that meant not only losing her, but losing the home she brought stability to. Control, power, money. They all point to motive. His calmness in interviews, his refusal to help in searches, and the story of the 2 red suitcases that no one ever saw painted a picture of a man hiding far more than he admitted. But the whispers never stopped with Greg alone. Which leads to theory 2. Someone else may have helped. Maybe inside that house, Laura tried to leave but was prevented. Maybe an accomplice was involved. Neighbors recalled inconsistencies in Greg's story. Family members raised questions about whether others in Greg's circle knew more than they let on. If Laura was silenced, could it really have been done without anyone else noticing? Or was there a quiet agreement to look the other way? The first shocking reveal would cut through speculation like a blade. A surveillance camera. Positioned across from Greg's property, it became the silent witness that Greg never expected. The footage showed Laura entering the house on September 13th. It never showed her leaving. What it did show was Greg carrying heavy objects to his truck, moving slowly, deliberately, long after Laura vanished inside. That single tape ripped holes through his story of her walking away with luggage. It was the evidence no one could explain away. Then came the second reveal. The cover-up. When police entered the home, it looked scrubbed, sanitized. No signs of a struggle. No signs of Laura's departure. Her phone was powered off, her belongings abandoned. And Greg's statements changed ever so slightly, depending on who asked the questions. To one person, she stormed off in anger. To another, she left calmly with her suitcases. The lies piled so high that the truth was smothered underneath. But the evidence that cut deepest was not forensic. It was emotional. Laura's children, sitting in interviews, reliving the last words they heard from their mother. Each unanswered call. Each day without news. Each lie they were forced to hear from the man who claimed to care for her. They begged investigators to see what they saw. To hear what they heard. To understand that Laura Johnson was not the kind of mother who simply disappeared. And in the end, their pain told the story as much as the evidence did. Their trust had been shattered. Their hope had been stolen. And still, to this day, Laura's body has never been found. They live with the ache of not knowing where she is, only knowing what was taken from them. So here is the question for you. If a camera caught your loved one walk into a home, never to be seen walking out, what would you believe? Would you ever forgive the person who swore she left freely? Laura's silence still demands answers. Her children still demand justice. And stories like hers remind us all, disappearance is never the end of the story. If you believe Laura's name deserves to be remembered, don't just watch. Speak her name. Like, comment, share, and subscribe so her voice does not vanish again. Because silence is exactly what Greg Green counted on, and silence is the one thing we cannot allow. Behind the walls of that home were not only secrets, but 5 children waiting for answers. Answers that may never come. Imagine the weight of that silence. Every day after September 13, 2018, Laura's children dialed her number, praying for a ring, a message, a simple text saying, "I'm okay." Instead, their calls fell into a void. Each unanswered ring became a knife in the heart. They searched for her. They begged the police to keep looking. They retraced her steps, replayed her last words, asked themselves over and over, what did we miss? What sign did we overlook? Some wrote down their fears in journals. Others clung to old voicemails, replaying her voice just to feel close to her again. Their diaries and testimonies reveal the same unbearable truth, the fear of not knowing where she is, or what happened inside the house she shared with Greg Green. This was not just a missing persons case. It was a theft of safety. A mother stolen from her children. A family stripped of the one person who was supposed to be their anchor. And all of it happened in a home that should have been their safe place. The devastation ran deeper than absence. It shattered trust. They had to live with the knowledge that the man Laura lived with, the man who told them she walked away, was convicted of her murder. Yet even with a guilty verdict, they were denied the closure of a grave to visit, a body to mourn, a goodbye to hold on to. For the children, every unanswered question is a wound that refuses to heal. Every lie Greg told is another betrayal layered on top of their grief. And as years pass, the silence grows heavier, not lighter. So I'll ask you this. What would you do if your mother disappeared into a house, never to walk back out? Would you rest? Would you stop searching? Or would you carry her name until the world could no longer ignore it? Laura's children have chosen to fight. They will not stop. They cannot stop. Because to them, every like, every comment, every share is not just engagement. It is resistance against forgetting. Don't be the person who hears this story and scrolls away. Be the person who refuses to let silence win. Like this video. Comment Laura's name. Share her story. Because her children are still waiting for answers, and the least we can do is wait with them. Greg Green insisted he was innocent, but the evidence painted a chillingly different story. After weeks of mounting suspicion, investigators made their move. Green was arrested, charged with deliberate homicide, and brought before the court. The trial was not just a fight for justice. It was a clash of stories. On one side, Greg's calm insistence that Laura had simply walked away. On the other, the state's evidence, every piece cutting deeper into his fragile defense. His attorneys painted Laura as unstable, claiming she had chosen to leave, that she had tired of the relationship, that she wanted distance. They leaned on the absence of a body, hammering at the idea that without one, there could be no certainty of murder. But prosecutors countered with the facts that could not be erased. Surveillance footage showed Laura entering the house, never leaving. Neighbors described Greg's late-night movements, hauling heavy objects into his truck. Investigators testified about his conflicting statements, each version of his story shifting depending on who asked the questions. The state's narrative was sharp. Laura Johnson was dead, and Gregory Green was the man responsible. The lies about suitcases, the scrubbing of the house, the lack of panic, the lack of urgency from the man who should have cared most. Every contradiction was another nail in his coffin. Testimony after testimony layered the case. Detectives stood in court and explained how Greg's timeline unraveled under scrutiny. How he claimed Laura had packed her belongings, but every important item she owned, her phone, her clothes, her personal effects, remained inside that house. They explained how his explanations bent and twisted until nothing remained but suspicion. And through it all, Laura's children sat in the courtroom, forced to hear their mother's name turned into arguments and defenses. Forced to listen as Greg's voice echoed through the halls of justice, still insisting on innocence even as evidence crushed his story. The absence of Laura's body made the case rare, fragile, difficult. Yet the jury watched the footage. They listened to the contradictions. And they weighed the silence Laura left behind. So here is the question. If your partner vanished, leaving everything behind, and the only person left to explain it gave you nothing but lies, what would you believe? Don't let apathy steal this moment. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Because this is not just a trial in a courtroom. It is the trial of truth versus silence. And the verdict would define whether Laura Johnson's name would be remembered or erased. 2 suspects, 1 household, and a web of lies thick enough to bury the truth. The trial of Greg Green might have ended with a guilty verdict, but investigators were far from satisfied. The question that lingered in the air, the question whispered in the community was this: did Green act alone? Or did someone else in that house help cover Laura's disappearance? Detectives began to look closer, not just at Greg, but at those closest to him. A neighbor, a friend, a person who had access to the home and knew its routines. Someone who, according to witnesses, seemed to know too much and say too little. When police questioned them, inconsistencies rose like smoke from a hidden fire. Stories didn't align. Timelines shifted. And the more investigators pressed, the more it seemed impossible that Greg had orchestrated everything on his own. Could he really have moved evidence, scrubbed the house, silenced every trace of Laura, without another pair of hands? Without another set of eyes watching, waiting, helping? Rumors spread through Great Falls like wildfire. Some claimed a neighbor had helped dispose of evidence. Others swore that a close friend had lied to shield Greg. And with every rumor came another layer of doubt, another question left unanswered. The community demanded clarity. Was there a second suspect living in plain sight? Or was Greg Green alone responsible for a crime so devastating it tore through 5 children's lives and left an entire city haunted? The official investigation kept details close, but what leaked was enough to shake trust in every direction. Because if someone else had helped, then that person walked free. Ate at restaurants, went to work, smiled at neighbors, all while carrying the weight of Laura Johnson's disappearance on their conscience. So I'll put the question to you. If evidence pointed not just to one guilty man, but to the possibility of 2, how far would you go to demand answers? How long would you wait for justice? Don't let this case fade into silence. Don't let Laura's story be reduced to rumors and shadows. Like this video, comment what you believe. Share this story so the truth, whatever it is, cannot be hidden. Because silence protects no one. And someone out there knows exactly what happened inside that house. Every story seemed rehearsed. Every answer, just a little too perfect. When detectives pressed deeper into the home Laura Johnson once shared with Greg Green, they didn't just uncover inconsistencies. They uncovered a household of lies. Conflicting accounts from family members painted a fractured picture. One claimed Laura had packed 2 red suitcases and left willingly. Another insisted she was seen in the home long after Greg claimed she was gone. Every version contradicted the last, as if truth itself had been carefully edited, rewritten to protect someone or something. Investigators discovered alibis that shifted with each retelling, financial records that hinted at sudden, unexplained transactions, and messages, texts and calls that had been deleted, wiped clean at the very moment Laura's voice fell silent forever. The deeper detectives dug, the clearer it became. Lies weren't just told in that household. Lies were constructed, layered, reinforced. A shield built not to protect innocence, but to protect guilt. Think about it. If the people inside that home couldn't agree on when Laura left, what she carried, or even what mood she was in, what does that say? Was it confusion born of grief, or collusion born of fear? The Johnson family, desperate for clarity, felt stonewalled at every turn. How could they trust words that shifted like sand beneath their feet? How could they find their mother when the very people who should have offered truth instead gave them riddles? Behind closed doors, investigators whispered their own fears. If Greg Green hadn't acted alone, if others had played a part, then lies weren't just protecting him, they were hiding an entire conspiracy. So here's the question that still haunts this case. How many people knew what happened to Laura Johnson? And how many chose silence over justice? If that thought chills you, it should. Because silence leaves killers free, and lies bury victims twice. Don't let this case be smothered by the weight of secrets. Like this video, share Laura's story. Subscribe so her voice never fades. Because every click is a demand for truth, and truth is the one thing her children are still waiting for. How do you prove a murder when the victim has vanished completely? That was the question that haunted investigators. Laura Johnson was gone. No body, no crime scene, no clear trail leading to her final moments. And yet, science began whispering truths that words could not. Forensic teams uncovered blood traces in the home Greg Green shared with Laura. Small, almost invisible to the eye, but unmistakable under testing. DNA matched to Laura appeared on household items she should never have bled on. Then came the car. Greg's vehicle carried unexplained mileage, trips taken late at night that he could never convincingly explain. Places searched later yielded no body, but the timing raised alarms. Piece by piece, a picture formed. Laura had not walked away. Laura had not abandoned her children. Something violent had happened inside that home. Prosecutors argued it plainly. The absence of a body did not erase the presence of evidence. The stains, the data, the lies. Together, they pointed only one way, toward murder. But convicting without a body is one of the hardest tasks in any courtroom. Juries want certainty. They want proof of death. And in Laura's case, that proof was missing. which left one terrifying question in the air: would Greg Green walk free? And yet, the evidence was enough to sway a jury. Greg Green was convicted. In that courtroom, the weight of years finally crashed down. The jury believed the state's case, that Laura Johnson's disappearance was no mystery at all but the act of a man who thought he could erase her existence. Green's reaction was telling. He maintained innocence, shaking his head, his voice flat, his eyes cold. But his words could not undo what science had shown. For Laura's children, the verdict brought bittersweet relief. Their mother had been heard. Her absence had been recognized. And yet grief clung tightly, because a conviction did not bring a body home. There was no grave to visit, no closure, no final goodbye. Justice was served, or was it? Because one haunting question still remained. Where is Laura? Without that answer, theories swirled. Some believed Greg Green acted alone, killing Laura and disposing of her body in some place investigators never found. Others whispered of a second accomplice, someone who helped conceal the evidence, someone inside the household who knew more than they ever admitted. And then came the most controversial theory of all, that Laura had fled, disappearing by choice. But why would a devoted mother abandon her 5 children, leaving them to years of confusion and heartache? To many, that possibility felt less like an explanation and more like an insult to her memory. So we're left standing at the edge of 3 paths. Greg alone, Greg with help, or Laura running into the night. Each theory pulls in a different direction. Each theory leaves questions unanswered. And now, the question turns to you. Which theory do you believe? Did Greg Green act alone? Did he have help from inside that very household? Or, against all logic, did Laura vanish by choice? Comment below with your thoughts. Because the debate is not just about speculation. It's about keeping Laura Johnson's story alive. So don't just watch, demand answers. Like this video, share it, subscribe, because silence serves no one but the guilty, and truth is the only justice Laura's children have left. Laura's story isn't just about loss, it's about lies that can live longer than truth. Even after the gavel fell, her children still searched. Not for justice that had been handed down, but for her. For the remains of the mother who kissed them goodnight, for the woman whose laugh filled their home, for the certainty of a final place to say goodbye. Search parties continued. Investigators revisited fields, rivers, wooded lots. Every lead, no matter how faint, carried the same desperate hope that one day Laura Johnson would be found. Her family clung to that hope because closure was the only thing left that could dull the sharp edge of absence. But with every year that passed, the weight of silence grew heavier. Laura's legacy became a warning about the hidden dangers behind closed doors, about the cracks in a home that can't be seen from the outside, about the lies that shield abusers until it's too late. Her story wasn't just about a missing woman. It was about a system that didn't hear her cries soon enough, a partner who masked control as care, and children forced to grow up with questions instead of answers. But just when the dust seemed settled, another chilling detail surfaced. A neighbor came forward, recalling a sound in the dead of night. A noise they couldn't place then, but one they couldn't forget later. Investigators followed that memory and uncovered something haunting, an item linked directly to Laura, discarded far from the home she vanished from. It wasn't her body. It wasn't the end of the mystery, but it was proof that somewhere along the way, someone carried part of her story into the dark and left it behind. Somewhere, out there, the rest of Laura's story still waits to be uncovered. 2 suspects, 1 household of lies, a mother of 5 who never came home, and a family still waiting for answers. What do you think really happened to Laura Johnson? Was Greg Green the only one responsible? Or is there someone else still out there, living free, carrying secrets that could finally bring Laura home? Leave your theories in the comments. And if you believe Laura's story deserves to be remembered, don't just scroll past. Like this video, share it, and subscribe. Because the more people who know, the harder it is for the truth to stay buried. And join us next time, when a mother's private diary predicted her own disappearance.